of the GDP chapter in macroeconomics, and we have just talked about GDP, what it is, the definition, which is very important, and this next section is going to be the components of GDP. And this is kind of important too, because if you want to improve GDP or know what's going on with GDP, it's good to know, where to start, and where to start is the components of GDP. So, recall that GDP is total spending. We're going to be using something known as the expenditure approach, and there are four components. Four components. Number one is consumption. Number two, investment. Number three, government purchases. Number four, net exports. These components add up to GDP, which is denoted as Y, or total expenditure, sometimes referred to as total income, although that's right, it would be total expenditure. C plus I plus G plus NX, or net exports. Now, net exports, I forgot to say, is exports minus imports. We oftentimes write that as X minus M. The next few slides will look at each of these components in detail, starting with consumption, which is total spending by households on goods and services. So this is what households spend on various items. And remember, a household is you and I. And you and I, or whoever is living in a household at a time. If it's a single person, obviously it's just that person. If it's a family, then it's that family. Okay? Note on housing costs. Now, when somebody buys when somebody rents, that would be the consumption, that would be the rent. The issue of somebody who buys a house is a little different. The consumption includes, shall we say, the imputed rental value of the house. We're assuming that the homeowner is going to rent the house to themselves. So is not necessarily the purchase price or the mortgage payments, but what the homeowner, assuming that the homeowner is going to rent the house to themselves. So in a way, it's kind of like a depreciation of sorts. So let's say that if I were to rent the house for $2,000 a month, and I'm living in it, that $2,000 a month would be part of my consumption on the house itself. Now we move over to investment. Investment is total spending on goods that will be used in the future to produce more goods. So this is, for lack of a better term, business expenditure. And it includes spending on capital equipment, so things that are used to produce other goods, truly. The structures in which these capital goods will be put in, and inventories, goods produced but not yet sold. Investment, keep in mind, does not mean purchasing of stocks and bonds. It is money used to buy business goods. Investment, from our perspective, it has an emphasis on production. Government purchases is all spending on goods and services purchased by the government at federal, state, and local levels. And again, the emphasis is on production, so G, or government, excludes transfer payments such as Social Security or unemployment. These payments represent transfers of income, not purchases or not production. Alrighty, so state office buildings would be, shall we say, production. Salaries of government workers, of which I am one, would be production. Military, whatever your feelings about the military are, that definitely is government. Spending on education, highways, roads, other infrastructure is all government. Net exports is exports minus imports. Exports, foreign spending on the economy's goods and services. So this is what the US or Hawaii might send off to foreign lands. So we're exporting goods and services. In Hawaii's case, it's a special kind of situation. Our exports would include tourism. Even though they're coming here, they're still spending on stuff that we produce. We produce a service, we don't produce a physical good that we send off to that foreign country. Now, something like a macadamia nut would indeed be a true export, an export on a good. Now, imports are, as it says here, the portions of consumption, investment, and government that are spent on goods and services produced abroad. So these are things that we buy from other countries. So their cars, their electronics, basically anything that China produces is going to be an import of us from them. Adding up all the components gives us, again, y is equal to c plus I plus g. Okay. Now, putting it all together, what is the major component of GDP? And the major component is consumption. This is in 2005, about 70% of GDP. Now, the fourth column over, per capita, is taking the GDP figures and dividing it by the population. So that gives a more real number as opposed to 12,000 billion, which in essence is 12 trillion. We would say per capita GDP of 42,000. And that number we can compare to other countries as well, taking their population into consideration. So we hold population constant in that case. All right, so C, consumption, is the largest component. Now here is a situation of Hawaii. In Hawaii's case, consumption is still a large component, but it is not nearly as large as in the rest of the country. It's only 46%. So in Hawaii's case, we've got government as a huge component. That's the military. Visitor expenditures are exports. Other exports, that would be the macadamia nuts and such. And investment is going to be 6%, so that's going to be business expenditure. So you can see that in Hawaii, we're dominated by tourism, government, and consumption, consumer spending. Those are the three big pillars of our economy. Okay, we're going to move on to more the measures of GDP. So here we go to real versus nominal GDP. Now, inflation can distort economic variables like GDP, so we have two versions. One is corrected for inflation and one is not. Nominal GDP values output using current prices, so the prices that actually exist. It is not corrected for inflation. Real GDP values output using the prices of a base year. So we would say these are constant prices. Real GDP is corrected for inflation. I'm going to go through a couple of examples right now. And here is an example. We have the land of pizza and latte. And we have the prices and quantities. This is assuming that everything that is produced is just pizza and latte. We have the prices, we have the quantities for 02, 03, and 04. So the nominal GDP for 02 would be the price times the quantity. Price of $10 times 400. For 2003, it's $11 times 500 plus 250 times 1100. So we're just going right across the row here. And 2004, $12 times 600 plus $3 times 1200 equals 10,800. So there's an increase of 37.5%. That's taking the change over the base. Or you could say 8250 divided by 6,000, or the difference, which I think would be 2,250 divided by 6,000. And the change between 03 and 04 is 30.9%. Now that looks like a big number, and it is a big number. But notice that two things have changed here: the prices and the quantities. We want to look, since GDP does look at output, we want to hold constant the effect of prices. So we calculate not real GDP to take that into consideration. So here's how real GDP works. We use a base year, 2002, and it's going to be the base year prices times the current year quantities. So there's the base year. So 10 times 400 plus 2 times 1,000. 10 times 500 plus 2 times 1,100. 10 times 600 plus 2 times 1,200. So the quantities are the same. The quantities are different. The prices are the same. The increases have leveled off, but in this case, we are looking at changes in merely the quantities and not the prices. I think the next slide is going to illustrate and focus on the changes in each year. Nominal is measured using the current prices. Real is using constant prices. There we go. So the change in nominal reflects both prices and quantities. Change in real is the amount as if prices were constant. Okay, this is going to finish